Hey everyone, welcome to Alive with OKclarity.com, the live experience that will bring you clarity on the topic of guilt and mental health. 5 tactics to integrate healthy shame into your lives. Tonight's live stream will be 30 minutes long. At around the 25-minute mark, you can post any Q&As into the chat, and I'll be happy to to answer them at any time. If you have any questions, just drop them in the chat at any time. I won't address any of them until the end, but please post them as you wish. A quick and important disclaimer, everything discussed tonight is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and none of it is a substitute for professional mental health, wellness, medical, or financial advice. All right. Just introduce myself. My name is Dr. Benson Fox. I'm a psychology doctorate, a recent graduate of Adelphi University. I am a life and dating coach, and I help people achieve better balance, joy, and achieve happiness in their lives. All right. So what is the problem that we're solving here today? Let's talk a little bit about shame. When you hear shame talked about in society, what do you think of? You think of it's toxic, it ruins your self-esteem, etc. But it's actually interesting is that, observing society today, we find almost this dichotomy, this strange duality, that at some point, people seem to not have any shame at all. People walk down the street, they're not embarrassed to say things as they once were on social media, etc. People feel very comfortable today to go around the world and say nasty, mean things to other people, to not take care of their basic hygiene, to just be rude or disrespectful, etc. There seems to be a lack of shame where the people feel so okay with getting rid of God in their lives, getting rid of anything that will constrain their sense of just whatever makes them comfortable or things that restrict their freedoms in any way. They just get rid of it and they don't care, the consequences don't matter. So on one hand, we see a lack of shame in society. But on the other hand, we seem to see an extreme amount of shame, more shame than we seem to have ever seen before. People are drowning in cycles of shame, right? They do something minor wrong, and then they're drowning in these cycles of shame. So oftentimes, as a clinician, people will come to me, or as a coach, and people will come to me and be seems to be the right approach is I see how gripped they are and how stuck they are in their shame, in these shame cycles. It seems to be that my role would be to reduce their shame. So I want to posit here today that although shame can be very destructive to self-esteem and the mental health today, I want to posit to you today that it's possible that what we're getting wrong is not the quantity of shame, but the relationship with the shame. I think that's just a really critical difference because, I would say that today's society has a very unhealthy relationship with shame. We fear it, we ignore it, we repress it. And the purpose of shame is not to hurt us. The purpose of shame is to cause us to do a change in our lives. And then many times we will only absorb its harshness and accumulated negative energy. We just internalize it and we don't use it and channel it the way it's meant to be used to create positive change that the shame intends and that God intended when he put it inside of us. Or, we allow it to be too dominant in our lives, right? We allow everything, if I mess up, I'm a perfectionist, right? So if I mess up in this presentation, I say one word usage that I did wrong, then I feel bad about myself, right? And the shame is too dominant in that sense. So we see clearly that the problem here is that there's a bad relationship with shame, and we'll get to some solutions in a minute. But before that, I just want you to see that this is really a universal problem in society. I think it's even in the same person. In the same person, you could have people who are really stuck in shame, and at the same time, you have people that are stuck in shame. At the same time, they have too little shame in one area of their life, and they have too much shame in another. So I want to say that has to do with our relationship. All right. So let's deal with some caveats, right? Shame can be damaging, and it's commonly too punishing for many people who seek out therapy, many people who need therapy or don't seek it out. Shame is also a gift from Hashem, right? It's like every part of us, right? As you'll know if you have listened to some of my presentations here, every single part of us is good in the right dose and context. It's a little mini, like my name is Benson Fox, so it's a little Benson that's inside of me. There's countless parts of them. And they're meant to be treated with respect, with love, with gratitude, appreciation, with communication, etc. And the purpose of shame is that it protects us from violating our values, and it guides us towards positive, good change. And this is not my own idea, right? This is an idea in IFS, Internal Family Systems Therapy. It's also, it has precedent in Chazal, right? Chazal say that charata, that, right, some people get into the semantics games of, it's guilt and not shame, etc. But for now, we'll just use the term shame, that shame is a necessary and primary component of tshuva. It's one of the three primary prerequisites, or really aspects of tshuva. And all three of our relationships, Beinam la'atzmo, Beinam l'chaver, Beinam l'makom, between us and God, between interpersonal and intrapersonal, all follow the same rules. So if we find this by tshuva, that shame is an important piece, then the same will be true as well for Beinam la'atzmo, between our intrapersonal, how we interact with this part of us, the part of shame. So I'll tell you something interesting, because some may challenge this notion, and some may say that shame is not a good part of us. And I will propose to you this today. No part of us gets more shame than the shame part. It's ironic. Because I could put you through this test. This is the following test I'd put you through. If you say that shame is not a good part of you, I would ask you this. Is this part of you that carries shame, the part of you that tells you to feel shame, should you shame that part? Right? Should you shame it? And I think most people, if they're being honest, they would say, yes, it's not a good part of me, and therefore I should shame it. I should make it say that it's bad, it's not good, and then say things like that to it. And it's interesting, because if you're willing to acknowledge that shaming is useful, even if only to turn it on itself, to shame a shame, then what you're acknowledging that it has a place. And if once you're acknowledging it has a place, then we can expand it to other places as well. So I would just point out that many times people will say, like anger doesn't have a place. Are you angry at the anger part? They're like, yes, of course, the angry part should have no place in my life. Many times we feel very comfortable turning the part onto itself, but really, once we acknowledge that it has a usefulness in that respect, that maybe it may have a usefulness, a positivity, a productivity in other facets of our life. And that's why Hashem gave it to us, not just to repress and to deny and to reject it, but to channel it and to holster it, in our repertoire and use it appropriately, in the right dose, in the right context. The one last part, right, so we're just saying that ironically, that shaming it acknowledges that it has a place. Unshaming it acknowledges that it is not just totally bad. But one last point I'll just mention, a fourth caveat, is that shame, just because you're giving it a place, does not mean you say it's good, doesn't mean it should be dominant, right? I think eating is good. If you're always eating, it threatens your health. It's not a good, and no part of you is good, and it's too dominant, right? The part of you that wants to be give is too good. Then you're a shmata, right? The part of you that wants to, give tzedakah. It's a very good part of you, but that part of you may want to be too generous, and then you'll have no money for yourself, right? The part of you that has boundaries is good, but it's not good if it keeps you away from people that you love. So every part of you is good in the right dose, in the right context, but that does not mean it's an advisor. It's not the CEO. You are the CEO, and you have to decide which dose, in which context and how high or low of a dose, depending, on the situation. So I just want to say that just because it's good does not mean you should let it run rampant or become too dominant. All right, so let's talk today about the solution, right? So how do we deal with this? I'm framing the problem with shame, not as intrinsically shame is something that's bad. I am framing the problem with shame as saying that shame is something that is only problematic when we have a bad relationship with it. So we're going to make five ways to how do we become, again, we're the CEO, you're internal parent, you're the CEO, you're the one who has to make the executive decisions in what context to use shame and what, you're the internal leader. So how should the internal leader clarify if shame is going to be healthy or unhealthy in a person's life? So let's clarify it as such. There's a difference between shame with what you do versus shame with who you are. See, the following internal message, let's say a person violates their moral code. I'll give something more extreme, right? Let's say they eat on Yom Kippur, right? Should you feel shame for that? Absolutely. But what should that shame be telling you? I am a Russia? No, so that's not a healthy shame, because that's not true, right? That's an oversimplification. You did engage, let's say, in an act of evil, or an act of that wasn't the right thing to do. So you should feel badly about it, and that feeling badly about it will guide you to a positive change. However, do not define yourself based on one failing and falling. One time that when you faced temptation and you did not succeed in overcoming it. That's not who you are. That's what you did. So the shame, one way to clarify if it's a healthy shame or not a healthy shame, is it focused on what you did or focused on who you are? Number one. Number two, is it proportionate to the sin, right? If you did a petty crime, right? You did jaywalking, and then internally you're whipping yourself, right? That's not proportionate to the crime. Right? Eating on Yom Kippur, that's a pretty severe sin. But let's say it's, you went to a later Shacharis. That doesn't deserve yourself beating yourself up for that. You probably needed your sleep. You're still davening, etc. It's not something to really, to hurt yourself over that. So it really needs to be, you need to think of something that's proportionate to the crime. And when I say crime, that itself is a strong word to use. Some things, to call it a crime may be an overstatement. Something that you could have done better, right? Let's say you sent in a paper to your college professor, whatever it is, and it wasn't the best paper. And you came back, you got a B+. Is that something to beat yourself up over? No, it's not. All right? Beating yourself up is really something that's really only in the most extreme violations of your internal code would be appropriate. Otherwise, you don't always, when you're using shame, go to the most extreme punishment to control yourself. It's being internally abusive to oneself. It's being internally disrespectful to oneself when you use a disproportionate amount of shame to the situation. As is using too little, right? If you do something majorly wrong, and I think therapists today, many of them, I think inappropriately, in my humble opinion, will say it's okay, it was this, it was that. And I understand that for someone who has excessive shame, doing that can be helpful for certain people in certain circumstances. But my point, though, is that many times it is appropriate, and it's the right situation, and it's the right time, and it is proportionate. But my point is that sometimes it's too little, and sometimes it's too much. And you need to make sure that what you're doing to clarify if this shame is appropriate is to see if it's proportionate to the sin. So number one, it's focused on what you did, not who you are. Number two, it's proportionate to the crime, proportionate to the sin, proportionate to the violation of your internal code. Right, and it's not too right. Another way to say this to make sure that's not proportionate is it being too demanding of you? Is it saying that, if I don't do a perfect thing, if I don't get everything I need to be done in the next 20 minutes, and it's not a reasonable time frame, then I'm a loser, right? So number one, as we said, it's not who you are. So that would be violating the right point number one over that we're saying. Tactic number one. But number two is just to see that it's not being realistic. That's being too punishing. It's being too unrealistic. It's being too demanding. It's being too punishing. That's another way to clarify. So if it's proportionate and if it's not too demanding, realistic, or punishing. Number three. Let's discuss today, what is the purpose of shame, right? So we said it's meant to be this catalyst and motivation for healthy change and growth, right? So the thing is that if your shame is not putting you into that type of place, many times that's because you're not using it in the right way. So if you're finding your shame is getting you paralyzed and stuck, that's a sign that's a pretty accurate sign that this is not a healthy shame that you're experiencing. If this shame is getting you to make major changes positive changes in your life, but you're not sure if it's healthy because you're saying it's making me feel bad in the short term. No, there's a price to be paid for shame. Shame doesn't come for free, right? Shame has a cost on a person's temporary sense of joy and mental health. And in my view, that's okay. As long as it's proportionate, as long as it's focused on what you did, not who you are, as long as it is getting you to take positive action in your life. But if it's getting you paralyzed and stuck and just taking a toll and it's destroying your sense of self or self-esteem, etc., that's a big sign that this is not the healthy shame that we were discussing before. Number 4, there has to be a path to self-forgiveness and releasing the shame energy. Meaning, shame is not something you're supposed to be carrying this burden of guilt for the rest of your life. Now, let's discuss it. Let's be very careful here. Because many times when we carry shame for a long period of time, the reason why we're carrying it is because we fail to address the problem. So it could be, let's say you felt shame in your relationship with your child or your parent or your sibling or your spouse. Many times it's because there are things that you said or didn't say that you should have said or should not have said. Right? And those things remain. There's something called like undelivered communications, the things that you really need to have said to them. Right? It could be something like, I love you, or something like that. But it could also be something as simple as, I appreciate you, or something specific that they do that has gone unrecognized or has gone, etc. So the point is that shame needs to have a path to forgiveness and release, but that's the release of the shame is meant to coincide, right, to be in sync with the positive change. Once the positive change occurs, meaning once there is that kind of reinforcement of that boundary that you violated, then the shame should be released. Meaning once you address the needs of the shame, which is the positive change, then that's when it should be released. That's when you should forgive yourself and move on from it. If you find yourself not moving on from shame and your shame just builds and accumulates, one of two things is going on. One is that you're ignoring it and you're not listening to what it's telling you to do. You're not doing the changes that you need to in your life, right? We know in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say you need to go through all the relationships in your life, that you need to fix, etc., to come to a closure, to come to that's kind of what I'm describing here, that there needs to be a path to self-forgiveness, but that self-forgiveness is supposed to happen after you make the change in your life. If let's say you think you really should be more religious in your life, maybe you're right, maybe you should be, and maybe you are violating your code, and the correct approach is not to unshame you, right? That to me would be unhealthy. It'd be unhealthy to try to unshame you, because I think, first of all, it won't work. Your shame won't go away. You're engaging in like kind of an intellectual form of repression on your shame. Your shame is not going away because you tell your shame that it's okay. It knows that you didn't really address what it needed to. And it's kind of gaslighting it in a sense. So the self-forgiveness needs to happen after the change. But my point, though, is that once that change occurs, then you need to be open to allowing self-forgiveness into your life, then to release it, not just always carrying this burden on your shoulder, on your back and your shoulder. Yes, you made a mistake. Yes, it was wrong. And yes, you knew when you're doing it was wrong. And you caused destruction or problems and pain to others. But at the end of the day, you need to allow yourself this path towards forgiveness. And that happens after the change. Do not try to unshame yourself before the change. You could bring it down from the shame being excessive to proportionate, but don't take it from proportionate to too little, right? Because if you try to do that, first of all, it doesn't work. And number two is that, number one, the shame, it won't work. And number two, you're just repressing it. But number two is that you're also denying yourself the benefits of the shame. So the benefits of the shame is that it's going to give you this positive change. It's going to get you to reinforce these boundaries, internal boundaries, and maintain and sustain your internal values. Number 5. There should be 80-20 rule. And this is just a good rule of thumb, not just for shame, but it applies to shame as well, so we'll mention it in here. But it applies to really anger, resentments, jealousy, etc. All negative emotions. And sometimes those negative emotions are legitimate. But, however, you cannot allow negative emotions to take up more than 20% of the space of your brain on average, right? God forbid if someone's loved one dies. That during those days, weeks, maybe months, the negative side may be more dominant, and that is okay, and that's legitimate. My point, though, is on average, you should be looking at an 80-20 split. 80% positive, 20% negativity. If you're seeing that consistently you're engaging in this negativity, the complaining, the anger, the resentments, the problems, the pains, etc., and that's what you're focused on, majority, or even just more than 20%, then you have a problem on your hands. And if that is being consumed by too much shame, that even if the shame is legitimate, even if you have not completely addressed its core causes yet, maybe try to listen to it, etc. But let's say assume that you're doing the most you can to make this positive change in your life, and it's just not happening. So what do? So I think in that point, you do need to repress the shame, even though, etc., that it's the problem is not really the shame. The problem is that maybe you haven't been listening to shame enough, etc. But still, in order to function in this world and to live with a modicum of joy, etc., to live with energy and purpose, you can't be drowning in negativity. If you do, you're not only you're not going to listen to your shame, you're not going to listen to your anger, you're not listening to any negative parts, because the negative parts are all chiming for your attention, and they're all sucking you dry of your energy, and that's not good. All your negative parts serve a positive, good purpose. They're all gift from Hashem, etc. But you can never allow your negative parts to become on average, more than 20% of your time. So if you're seeing that shame is dominating your life, and among other negative traits, and overall your negativity is more than 20%, then I would first advise you to try to make the positive changes, listen to what they're saying, address what they have in your life. But potentially, in the short term, because in the long term this won't work, but in the short term, repressing them and just, through sheer willpower to maintain the 80-20 rule of positivity to negativity, to me would be appropriate. But again, if you're not engaging in too much negativity, more than the 80-20 rule, then I would say then that's a good sign, again, that your internal leader is going too far with this idea. All right, so let's do a quick recap here of what we spoke about today in terms of all of these points. If you have any questions, I'm going to be doing the recap right now. So if you have any questions at all, just post them below in the Instagram chat, and I will address them after I finish the summary. But please type away as I'm doing the summary. All right, so here's what we spoke about today. We said the problem with shame is not necessarily really the quantity of shame. It's not shame itself, but it is your relationship with the shame. And we said that shame is a gift from Hashem. It serves the purpose of helping us reinforce our boundaries and guides us to the positive changes that we know deep in our soul that we need to do. Adam Yodea Maras Nasho. The person knows the bitterness of the heart, the things they need to change. You're the expert of your own life, and you know what that is. And shame will give you the energy and motivation to address it. So shame is good. In the right dose, in the right context, it shouldn't be too dominant, it shouldn't be the CEO, it should be the advisor. You're the CEO. And as the CEO, I gave you 5 ways that you can help clarify that the shame is something that's healthy, if the shame is something that's good for you. Number 1, the shame is addressing what you did, not who you are. You are not a loser. You are not a sinner. You are not evil, right? What you are is a pure, good neshama, a person filled with strengths and potential and possibilities. That's who you are, and you're part of the Jewish people. You're elevated. You are part of royalty. You have a responsibility and privilege to be a light unto the nations, right? That's who you are. Now, what you did something bad or not so bad, right? Focus on what you did, not who you are. That's number 1. Number 2, we said it has to be proportionate to the sin. Not too much, but also not too little, right? A healthy shame will be in sync with the severity of what was done. And then we said also, it's also, the length of it. It's not just an intensity, it's also intensity, frequency, right? How often, and duration, how long you're feeling the shame for. It should also be all proportionate, and it shouldn't be too demanding. The shame shouldn't be demanding too drastic change right away, or be too punishing to you, etc. So not too demanding, not too unrealistic, and not too punishing. Number 3, we said it should be acting as a catalyst and motivation for healthy change and growth. If it's not, that's a sign it's not such healthy change. It's not a healthy, it could be change, not a healthy level of shame. That's number 3. So it's the catalyst and motivation. Number 4, we said there has to be a path to self-forgiveness and releasing that shame energy, which should happen after you engage in the positive change, not before that. If you try to do before that, you're just kind of gaslighting your internal shame part, and it doesn't work. It's just a form of repression, and you'll pay the piper down the road in terms of lack of joy, etc. And number 5, we said keep the 80-20 rule. And they said the 80-20 rule to positivity to negativity, 80% positive in your mind, 20% negative in your mind on average. And by doing so, if you're finding that your shame is going too far, then in this area, then that's a sign that a person is not doing the right thing for their shame, and that's an unhealthy type of shame if there's too much negativity. And perhaps repression for a short term might be appropriate, but I would suggest first to try to address the shame. So let's just wrap up tonight. Again, if you have any questions at all, please just post it down here on the bottom. I hope tonight's conversation provided some clarity on guilt and mental health, 5 tactics to integrate healthy shame into your life. I just want you to walk away with shame is your friend. Shame protects you. It protects us from ourselves, from violating our values. I want you to integrate shame not as the CEO, but as the advisor who guides you to positive change and growth. And thank you for being here. I look forward to spending time with all you again very soon. Again, my name is Dr. Benson Fox ID, and I'm here from OKclarity. Have a wonderful, wonderful night, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.